Okay. Hello, everyone. I don't know if the mic is working or not. I can always project a la BBC. But it is working. How wonderful. Welcome to, well, you're very lucky. In April, we have 2 monthly lectures, and this is the second monthly lecture. We had one last week, of course, from Francisca Davis, and now we have SOLMAZ KHORSAND, who will be talking about being on the quest for legal unicorns against authoritarians, which if you don't yet understand what that exactly means, very soon you will do. Now, SOLMAZ is an award-winning, extremely well-known Austrian journalist, but her parents came from Iran, Iranian exiles. So along with her wonderful English, which she learnt in Dublin, amongst other places, and in Baltimore. And
no, in DC.
In DC. You were in DC, at Johns Hopkins in DC. She was at Johns Hopkins, she was at the City University in Dublin, and Johns Hopkins in Bologna as well. Her latest book, which there it is, there, is entitled Untertan, von braven und rebellischen Lemmingen. Roughly translated, that means subject, as in subject of a king or queen, about brave and rebellious lemmings, which is an intriguing title, and I'm looking forward to reading it. SOLMAZ, you're going to talk for about 40 minutes or so, roughly 50 minutes.
50 minutes, you would
and
die on these chairs, probably.
About legal unicorns against authoritarians. And then we shall have a brief conversation before I throw over questions to the audience. And I feel I should mention here that, as is the tradition with the monthly lecture, after the monthly lecture and questions, we will have wine and cheese served downstairs. So if you want to stay on, you're more than welcome. And now I'm going to hand over to SOLMAZ for the lecture.
Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you for the introduction, Misha. And thank you all for being here. I didn't expect such a crowd. I'm very honored to speak here today, and I was also honored to be part of this institute for the past couple of months. I kept telling my friends in Vienna that if you ever lose your faith in humanity, you might want to drop by and talk to some of the fellows about their research projects. It might help. I have to be a little bit transparent right at the beginning of my to be a little bit transparent at the beginning of my lecture, because it's not a lecture, it's more a reflection in progress, because I believe that journalists shouldn't lecture too much or at all. We should rather reflect and observe and listen and ask many, many questions. To give you a little bit of context, when I applied for the Milena Jesenska Fellowship for Journalists here, I chose a topic that is a little bit unusual for me, because it's deeply optimistic in its core. As Misha said, and as you can read, my topic is about legal professionals who are saving us from authoritarian and authoritarian regimes by the means of law. So it's this classic heroic storytelling as you know it. And I chose this subject because of 2 reasons. First, because of my job. If you work for almost 2 decades as a journalist covering political and social affairs, you might become a little bit cynical about your fellow citizens and the world in general. And you might become a little bit too comfortable in this position as this pessimistic Cassandra, seeing everywhere just these indifferent, nasty creatures. So I wanted to give this whole constructive journalism spiel a try, where you're not only trying to report and analyze about certain topics, but also like provide certain constructive approaches to solve problems, so your audience is not constantly at the brink of suicide because of your apocalyptic reporting. So that was one reason. The second reason why I wanted to research dissident lawfare, as I call it, has to do with my privileges. I know it sounds a little bit egocentric, but most things in life are. And I had the privilege, like maybe many of you, to grow up in a very stable and rich and peaceful and democratic country, this one, Austria. And I had also the privilege, due to my profession and my biography, to get a tiny glimpse of what life in a dictatorship might look like, in a theocracy to be precise, the Islamic Republic of Iran. And I didn't only get a chance to see what life looks like, but also what resistance looks like. And resistance is a key element here, because when you grow up in a country like Austria, you don't get trained very much in a resistant mindset and this dissident mentality, because as long as you are considered to be part of the real Austrian society that is not constantly othered by political parties and the media, everything works more or less in your favor. And so when things are going down, you are not used to resist in a meaningful way, because things never went down for you. And as a trained pessimistic Cassandra, I'm always expecting that things are going down very quickly, and that will end up sooner than later in the Austrian version of Orban's Hungary. Also because of the Austrian electorate that was never too shy to vote in good numbers for an extremist party, and a conservative party that was never too shy to hand these keys of power to the extremists by building coalition governments. And as you remember, we almost got our little Orbanite at the beginning of this year. So what do we do when things are going down? What do we do when we have these little Orbanites coming to power, not with tanks and bullets and big ideologies, but with the power of the ballot box and a bunch of new laws that seem pretty harmless at the beginning? Have you studied the script of autocratic legalism and abusive constitutionalism? And who could help us to understand it and see all these threats in time? And there will be some pictures soon, don't worry. So I wanted to look at to answer these questions, I wanted to look to a profession that is in the engine room of power. And these are lawyers or law professionals in general. And because law is an instrument of power and also a potential delivery mechanism for authoritarian impulses, it is also a tool of struggle and of resistance, not only like to question an existing order, but also safeguard one that is under attack. And so I identify this group of legal professionals as being part of this first line of resistance against modern authoritarians. And it's probably worth mentioning here that I'm very much aware that this group is very diverse, because a lawyer has a different self-awareness, a different role in the legal system and in the state as such as, for example, a judge or a law scholar. And depending on their roles in the system, their capacity to resist differs as well. But I still believe that there's a resistance among the whole legal sector, and at least I hope that. And what I wasn't so aware when I started my research is that how alien this concept of resistance is within the legal group itself. But as soon as I talked to, after the first round of interviews, I talked to very young, dedicated law students in their final years of studies, to experienced, recognized, almost retired judges. I got the impression that that's very, very weird to them. As soon as they hear the word resistance, they would start to say, well, yes, of course, our professional tribe is very passionate about the work. Some of us go into this line of work to change the world, to make a difference, to protect the vulnerable. But most of us are just in for the money, for the stability and the prestige. And at a certain point, they would all tell me with this rather uncomfortable smile, we are not the big resistance fighters. That's not how we understand our job. That's not how we are taught our job. We are taught to the law, to interpret the law, and most of us see themselves as legal technicians and the legal practice not as an expression of a political, social, or moral cause. That's politics. Leave that to the politicians, that's their responsibility. We are scientists of law and we see the law as this neutral discipline. And at this point I would get usually annoyed and keep asking them, well, every legal system is embedded in a conception of a state, which is based on certain political norms and ideas about living together in a social structure. And as long as this concept is called liberal democracy, you're good to go with your neutral position, because everyone is more or less abiding to this rule of a liberal democracy and these rules of the game. But what if the concept is about to change because anti-democrats are no longer interested in keeping it? Will you just go along then? Or does the law, this wonderful neutral science, set limits to its own ideological instrumentalization? Can the law generate restrictions on systems of arbitrary political rule? And then, they would be and then at this point, they would be really uncomfortable. But usually, like to my surprise, they would say, in theory, yes, it can. Because we have the Constitution, we have European laws, we have international laws. And as long as they're valid, we have to abide to them. And it would be also part of our jobs to make others do the same. But constitutions can be amended, they can be rewritten, they can be interpreted in the most ridiculous ways, and international laws can be broken because the sanction mechanisms are very limited. So theory is one thing, reality another. So I realized that I need to change my working title from legal warriors to something more mythical, legal unicorns, because they're not so easy to spot. Here we go. Very handsome. And because I was so eager to find my legal unicorns, of course I found them because I was so committed to my constructive journalism approach. And I found them in different countries and in different shapes. It will come again, yeah. So I found them in Israel, Germany, Poland, and Iran / Russia / Belarus. So the last example is a bit different than the three first ones, but I hope I will get to that. Yeah. Let's start with my happy place in this regard, Israel. As many of you remember, before October 7th and the war in Gaza, there were big protests in Israel against the judicial overhaul. There were thousands and thousands of people on the streets to protest Netanyahu's government and the judicial package, which was basically disempowering the Supreme Court and making it a totally useless institution. And the package had different components. I just mentioned one of it, which is the so-called override clause, which would allow a simple majority in the Knesset to reinstate an unconstitutional law that was previously invalidated by the Supreme Court. And the supporters of this overhaul would argue that it would promote democracy because it would transfer power from an unelected judiciary to the elected branches of the government. And they argued that these plans would just restore the balance in Israel's separation of powers. And that's an argument that always comes up when authoritarians take over and want to reform the judiciary, saying it's just a very democratic move. And legal scholars and democracy activists were aware of these plans for years, and also get organized for years to counter them somehow. And there's one group that sounds a little bit nerdy, it probably is, but I love it. It's this professor coalition for the rule of law that became later the Law Professors Forum for Democracy. And it started off as this WhatsApp group of law professors from different law schools around the country discussing constitutional affairs. And over the years, they became more and more active and activist. And as soon as this saw that the new Netanyahu government is going to be built, decided to publish a statement, which was published in November 2022, about to warn against this override clause. And it was signed by about 200 scholars, and it was a great statement, but they realized it's just a statement. We need to do more. We need to do more outreach, and they started they started with media campaigns, talking to journalists, explaining in TV, radio, newspaper interviews what's going on. But they would also produce themselves little video clips to explain judicial terminology, and that's the communication part, which is great. But then they would really go into the field work. And that's the part that I'm very fond of, because they would, there were law professors who would basically say on their social media accounts, they would invite people over to their houses, to their living rooms, to give little legal seminars for strangers, like for 40 people or something, and explain them what's going on and why it's important to care about this kind of reforms. And they would not only invite people over to their houses, they would also go to people's workplaces. They would go to universities, they would go to high-tech hubs, they would go to schools. And I mean, my personal favorite is this group of law professors and law students who would swarm out at night to bars and drinking beer with young people in Tel Aviv and talking about constitutional stuff, which just the image of having this serious law professor sitting in a bar talking about the Supreme Court is just wonderful, and shows that they were really committed to this ideal of saying we need to leave the academic ivory tower and we need to go and engage with the public. And it had an impact. Like, people were informed, people started to care about things they would never care about because they didn't understand it, and suddenly they did because it was presented to them in a language that they understood. And they would get mobilized and start going on the streets. So the impact on this of these law professors and law scholars was, I mean, there was an impact. And what I also liked about the Israeli legal scholars is how much they reflected their own role, because it was not easy for some of them to say, well, okay, we are serious academics, we are not activists, but we have to do something now because we are the ones who have the legal knowledge. And some would really struggle with it by saying, well, our role is the pursuit of truth, and as so-called activists, we might have trouble disowning our work if mistakes are discovered, because we are committed to a specific cause that might be advanced despite of these mistakes. And but then they would justify the role by saying, well, we didn't promote a specific notion of justice. We just tried to inform people about something that they have no clue about, and now they can, so they wouldn't understand the implications of these judicial reforms. And I think this kind of reflection is important because it helps also other legal professionals in the spectrum to see, okay, it's not a dirty word to be an activist. It's not dirty to engage with the public. It's okay if you're not only writing articles and which are published in 2 years. It's okay to talk to ordinary citizens. So that's Israel. Germany, the preppers. Unlike Austria, in Germany there are some legal organizations that are very much aware of the authoritarian threats in Germany, and they also try to get prepared for it. And one group that I'm following for some years now is Verfassungsblock, which was founded 2009 by Maximilian Steinbeis, a constitutional jurist and journalist. And it basically started off as this one-man blog writing articles about constitutional affairs. And by now it has a staff of about 30 people, and they have offers, more than 3,000 offers worldwide, contributing to the platform, talking about constitutional affairs. And at least in Europe, in the constitutional legal community, it's like this holy grail of publishing, and it's like a badge of honor if you publish at Verfassungsblog from this community. And Verfassungsblog has two different parts which I think are important. One is, of course, the publishing part and explaining people like what's going on, but this is more addressed to the policy world and less to the mainstream public, because it's but the second part, which I'm more interested in, is the prepping part. Is basically this kind of what-if scenarios that they're trying to provide, and like what would happen if an authoritarian comes to power in Germany? How can we prevent that? What are the scenarios, and what would be some kind of recommendations? And Steinbeis himself, he did, I think, one of the best what-if scenarios with an essay that he published in the German newspaper, die Süddeutsche, with the title "Der Volkskanzler." Which means People's Chancellor. It was the name that Adolf Hitler used before. Okay, we're back. It's the name that I know. And it's also the same name that the leader of the Austrian Freedom Party is using to refer to himself. So that's the only thing I wanted to mention. And in this article, he explains in a very detailed scenario what would happen if a very charismatic guy with no particular ideology would win the elections in Germany, and how he would basically capture the state. And he would do it like all authoritarians. He would start with the judiciary by changing the composition of the constitutional court. He would add a third senate to the constitutional court. He would pack this senate with his loyalists, and these loyalists would be in charge of just certain political issues which would help him to basically break Germany's liberal democracy. And why I think this essay is so great, because it's still people not only in Germany, also in Austria and also in Switzerland are still referring to these essays, because it was on the one hand, it was a kind of a wake-up call for politically interested people who have no idea about constitutional affairs and the nitty-gritty of administration and how a state really works. And on the other hand, it was really well written. And it was written so really normal people could understand it, and that's maybe my appeal to some people in the audience. If there's someone from the German legal community here, you know it better than anyone else. At least in German, the legal language is terrible. It's exclusive, it's elitist, and therefore a lot of people find it really boring. And if they find it boring, they won't care about issues that are really important. And if they don't care, they won't get mobilized, they won't put pressure on political parties, and they won't go to do any protests. So it was great, this article was in this regard really great, because it was really addressed to ordinary citizens, and because it was well written. And Verfassungsblog would even go further with their this what-if analysis. One which is really famous and was well discussed, at least in Germany and also in Austria, was the Thüringen project, which was published in 2024, a couple of months before the regional elections in Eastern Germany. Thüringen is the state in Eastern Germany. It has about 2 million people and one of the most extremist wings of the AfD. And Verfassungsblog would research scenarios what would happen if an extremist party like the AfD will win the elections, and which they did in September, and what would happen if they would be either part of the government or a really strong opposition party, which they are right now. And they would provide not only the scenarios, they would also give some recommendations how to avoid certain things. And I will mention those two things because one is like an easy fix, and it sounds maybe naive, but I think it's really empowering because you feel like, okay, something can be done beforehand. For example, the presidents of the police force and the domestic secret service, these are political civil servants. So as soon as you have an extremist governor, he would replace them with his own people. And it's a little bit absurd, especially in Thüringen, if you have as the head of the domestic secret service an extremist who is investigating his own party. And you could change that by simple law by making this political civil servants to career civil servants, so you don't have an extremist in this position. Sounds like an easy fix. It won't save your democracy, but it's at least it will delay certain things. The second thing I was a bit weirded out when I read it, but I found it was interesting, was the Bundeszwang, which means federal coercion. It's a very radical and aggressive and probably dangerous proposal, but I found it very intriguing. It means that the federal government could force the state government to fulfill its duties if they're not abiding to them. For example, if an AfD government would deny resident permits to foreigners or stop naturalization processes. And they could force them by a multi-stage process by saying, well, first they will send special rapporteurs, and for each of these stages they would need the consent of the upper chamber of the parliament, the Bundesrat, and the constitutional court. So it would be controlled, but at the end of this whole process, the federal government could just waltz in and take over the duties of the state government and also cut some funds. Sounds very... Yes, I know it sounds controversial, it's aggressive, but what I liked about the proposal is it's saying, well, these are the tools of our beautiful constitution, use them. This is an extremist party, don't appease them, contain them as soon as you can, show the red lines, and start very early on in the process. Go into the confrontation as soon as you can and be transparent about it, use the constitutional courts. So that's a very unusual proposal, but I still think it's worth discussing, and I mean in the discussion we can also talk about it, and generally what the AfD actually doing right now in Thüringen as a strong opposition party. And they're doing a lot of things that the Verfassungsblock was anticipating already. Poland. They've been there, done that. Poland is a little bit of a sore spot for me, because it was my beacon of hope. And as soon as I talked to legal experts and civil society activists and people who work with the Polish government, and I think almost every single Polish fellow at this institute, my hopes got shattered. But let's start with the euphoria at the beginning, because I think we shared maybe this sentiment during the elections in October 2023, when the opposition bloc was unified and under Donald Tusk, and they won the elections and ended this 8 years of law and justice regime. So we all had this hope that these dark illiberal years are over and Poland will be back on track of the rule of law. It will just take some time, but it will happen. And the big question is, of course, how do you fix an illiberal democracy and the rule of law without breaking any laws? And after 1.5 years, the short answer to this is you don't, you fail. And one of the main reasons in the Polish case is the current president, Andrzej Duda, who is a PiS guy who considers himself to be one of the co-architects of the judicial overhaul in Poland, and he made clear from the very beginning, I'm not going to cooperate, I'm not going to sign any laws, and he didn't. So the big hope is now the presidential elections in May, when there will be hopefully a new president, and it might be Rafał Trzaskowski. Sorry, I totally butchered his name. No, what did I do? And he's the candidate of the Civic Platform, and he's heading the polls by, I think, 10%. So people really think he's going to win, and as soon as he's going to be in power, he will sign all of these proposals, and we will see some movement. So the Polish lesson here seems to be just be patient. It will happen. But to be honest, after I talked to so many experts in Poland, I was getting a little bit worried, because the overall assessment of the Polish government is rather bleak so far. I mean, for supporters, of course, because they couldn't deliver some of their main election promises, like the liberalization of the abortion legislation. I mean, abortion is basically still banned, just allowed in very few exceptions. And also their supporters were also very shocked of how extreme the current government is reacting on certain political fields like asylum and immigration. Some of you might remember in summer they passed a law which would allow the police at the border to Belarus to shoot at migrants that are trying to cross it illegally, which is basically a license to kill. And by the end of March, they also passed a law that was signed. This one was signed by the president because it was ideologically okay for him, to suspend the right for asylum at the border to Belarus for about 60 days, and it can be extended for another 60 days. And that's against the Polish constitution, it's against European laws. So it's not really a good look for a government that presents itself as defenders of rule of law by breaking the rule of law. And these legal experts were, because I talked to them in 2023 already, and they were really excited about the change, and they knew it was this window of opportunity that they can save Poland's democracy. And 1.5 years later, they're like not only frustrated and disappointed, they're also this disbelief that there is a real commitment by the Polish government to really fix what was broken in these 8 years. For example, the Constitutional Tribunal. A lot of the judicial institutions in Poland are still not independent and are still politicized, but the Constitutional Tribunal, because it is considered not an independent body, the government says, well, we can ignore all their judgments, we are not going to publish it, it's just not binding. And these experts are thinking that even after the presidential elections, they won't put much energy and time into revitalizing this Constitutional Tribunal, because it's pretty handy to govern without one. And and the European Union won't put any pressure on them, because anything is better than peace, and Donald Tusk is like this knight in shining armor who fought the populists, and there won't be any pressure from this side. But of course, I found also my Polish unicorn, my legal unicorns in Poland, and they were rather easy to spot. The judges. As you remember, the primary target of the previous government was, apart from the women, the migrants, the queer community, and the whole opposition, were the judges. And every judge who was slightly critical of the judicial reforms or governmental policies, or didn't judge in their favor, would be systematically attacked by the government. And some of them would be dismissed, some of them would have to deal with salary cuts, others would be reassigned to other courts in different regions. Some of them would be physically attacked on the street by peace supporters, and even their families would be intimidated. So it was a really scary and terrible time for judges. But the great thing about them is that they went immediately into resistance mode. And they used different ways. I mean, of course, they went on the legal road to appeal all this like forced retirements, and they would win in the national courts. Or they would also go to the European courts and make the European institutions work and act and care and basically punish Poland for all what they're doing to the civil society, to the judiciary, and so that was a big win. The other thing, again, I'm more interested in what they did in this field work because it's so extraordinary for them, is like they were starting to organize protests themselves. Like one march, which was very famous, was the March of 1,000 Ropes, where they could not only mobilize Polish civil society, also their colleagues in Europe, and so there would be people from, I think, about 20 European countries, and this kind of solidarity was very important to them to know that their own tribe is really caring about them internationally. And one judge, he's Igor Tuleya, who became a little bit of the symbol of this resistance, is this skinny guy with this very distinctive jawline. Looks a little bit like the little brother of Navalny. He said, like, well, actually, I was a really apolitical person. I was not interested in politics. I was just doing my job. But these attacks of law and justice made me a political person, gave birth to the civic judge that is not that is not isolated from the world, but engages with the public outside the courtroom. And I know it sounds, for someone like me, it sounds like a very simple thing, that it's apparently a huge deal that this kind of professionals are talking to ordinary citizens, because in my job I have to talk to ordinary citizens the whole time. I mean, I'm an ordinary citizen, as we all are, and even if it wouldn't be my job, I would still talk to them. But apparently for this legal professionals, that's a big deal. They never do that. They only stay in their courtrooms and they never talk to normal people. It's something very awkward to me. I mean, maybe there are legal professionals in the audience, but I hope you speak to ordinary citizens. Yeah, and the thing about the Polish judges is that they became very political during this time of law and justice, and they are still politicized, especially some of their interest groups like Justitia, which is representing about 40% of all Polish judges, and that's rather criticized by civil society activists and legal experts. They're saying, well, we understand that they want justice for these 8 years and maybe even vengeance. But their proposals they're making are way too aggressive, they're way too radical. These judges are no longer applying the law, they're really trying to make the law and interfere in the legislation, and they're just going too far. And one legislation which is heavily, it's criticized, is what to do with these 3,000 neo-judges that were appointed during this law and justice years. These 3,000 judges were appointed by this National Council of Judiciary, which is no longer an independent body. And so they would basically promote either peace loyalists, or they would promote rather inexperienced judges. But at the same time, a lot of young judges who would just have finished their traineeship would have go through this kind of process and be appointed. So it's a very diverse group, these neo judges. And Justitia is proposing, well, let's just they should all be demoted to the positions they had 8 years ago, and then they can apply again through an independent body, and we need to go to a verification process, and that's considered as not feasible. And yeah, but I think I still think this transformation of the judges is very interesting, and I hope I will meet some in June after the second round of the presidential elections. Okay. The last one. The last one is a little bit different than the three first ones, because this is pure reflection. And it's not only about Iran, it's also Russia and Belarus. It basically goes back to the beginning of my talk more, to look what is the role of a legal professional in the legal system, especially if you believe in the principles of human rights and rule of law and democracy, but you're operating in a system that doesn't do that, that violates all of these principles, that tramples on them. How do you how do you function as a lawyer or as a judge in this kind of system, and what's your scope of action? And for that, I spoke to Iranian and Russian lawyers, and these were only lawyers because the judges are more part of the system. And these human rights lawyers, it was very humbling because they wouldn't brag at all about their work, which I would, if I would defend human rights cases. And they would say, well, my job as a lawyer is so different than my job would be in a democracy like yours, and it depends on the political situation in my country, like how hard the repression are at a certain point in time, and sometimes it is litigation, but most of the times it's something totally different. And one human rights lawyer who told me that in the past 5 years he was more a PR agent. He was basically just explaining a national and an international audience what the cases of his clients are, and he knew that the only thing that he could hope for is this would put pressure on the regime, and it might it won't probably release them, but it would maybe not make sure that they won't be tortured, and it would maybe transfer them from a prison. It would transfer them from a prison in the middle of nowhere to a prison in the capital where he can hang out with other political prisoners conspiring about toppling the regime, and this would be even a win. Or like get them out of confinery isolation, imprisonment. So the whole approach is totally different, because they know, like in a democratic system, you have the chance, if you have a fair trial, if you have a fair judge and jury, there is the possibility of a just outcome for your client. But in a regime, it isn't. So your whole perspective and your expectation changes. You don't think about justice. You think only about survival, and that's maybe why I was so interested in them. And I think we should pay more attention to these human rights lawyers, because in some cases, they all look like these little wins, and it's more like an appeal to my professional tribe, because we usually look only at the big wins, the big protests, the big collapse of a regime, but we don't look at these little steps that lead up to it. And saving a person from execution, saving a person from torture, getting them out of the isolation, imprisonment, and just making sure that their mental health is still intact is a big win. It means basically you're keeping this opposition alive by your work, even if it doesn't look like a big win. That's it. Thank you.
Keep the picture up there. I like it. SOLMAZ, thank you very much indeed. Well, there's much food for thought there. I have 3 questions, which I'll try and be, we can try and keep them brief if possible. You mentioned the judges who were appointed, several thousand judges who were appointed during the 8 years of peace government. And you said that Justitia had gone so far as to say they had to return to where they were before they were appointed. I think one of the criticisms that was level against the peace government about that was that these judges were simply not sufficiently qualified. Yeah. And so my question to you on this, you seem to suggest that Justitia had gone too far in its demands. My question is, what do you do about those several thousand judges who have been appointed for political purposes when some measure of democratic rule and rule of law has been restored?
It was not my criticism. I was just like telling what legal experts and civil society activists were telling me about these proposals. But the thing is, like, they don't, apparently, I mean, one of the main criticisms is that they don't see the diversity of this group. Like, as I mentioned, like, there were a lot of young people who were not necessarily peace loyalists. They were just like, because they finished their training and they had to go into work. But there are also other proposals that are saying we need to look at individual, like one by one, like verify each and every single of these judges, like if they are qualified, if they are like just peace loyalists, or and then go further from there. And some others would say we will manage to integrate these 3,000 judges somehow in the system and just get rid of the most notorious ones. And I mean, so far I think that there are some. They sent these kind of proposals to the Venice Commission, and they said all of the proposals, they were very critical about them. They were saying
the Venice Commission was critical.
It was critical about it too. They were saying that's not feasible, and if these judges would be really demoted to their previous positions, they could go to the European Court and they would win their cases. And the thing is, like, and then the judges and one civil society activist who's working closely with Justitia said they didn't care. They just want the justice or vengeance at this point, and that's a bit scary because scary. I mean, what's scary now? But
well, of course,
it's apparently like there is not this real commitment to like, oh, we need to fix the rule of law for breaking it, but there is certain sacrifices that we need to do now. That's more the approach.
Because what it suggests, which is interesting, is that the whole process of dismantling the rule of law that peace undertook, that Netanyahu wants to do, and so on, that can then start to affect the whole, infect the whole discourse. Yeah. And everyone gets sucked into this issue of, well, as soon as they get into power, they're going to sack everyone and replace them with their people, which is extremely problematic. So really, in a way, the original sin, when people start dismantling it, is the most dangerous moment. You mentioned this provision called the Bundeszwang. Mm. And when you were talking about that, I was immediately put in mind of the Preußenschlag of when the von Papen government in 1932 sought to dissolve the socialist, Social Democrat Party's rule in Prussia, which they succeeded in doing. And this is regarded by historians as a very important moment on the road to Hitler's seizure of power, because the Federation assumed the right to itself to interfere in the government of Länder. So if I understand you right, the current constitution allows for this.
Yeah, it allows, and I mean, and they mentioned this too. They said, but it was never used so far after 45, and but they said there is this control mechanism you have for each state. You need to ask the Bundesrat, and you need to ask you need to have the consent of these two bodies every single time. And as I said, I also think it's a very radical approach. And at the same time, I talked to them about this, as I was more interested in this. It's usually the other way around. It's not the state is not the problem. The federal government is the problem in most cases. So what do you do about that? Like, how do you have any tools for that? As I know, we don't.
Well, talking of the federal government, that takes me to my final question, which is the government of the United States, where you have this paradoxical situation of a movement that was built up on states' rights. The MAGA movement has produced a president who's centralized power in the United States in a way that we've never seen before. And of course, Trump 1 prepared for Trump 2 in part by all of the appointments, all the federal appointments in various instances of the judicial system. I know that you didn't look at the US when you started doing this. But isn't this, in a sense, the most important of the lot? And given your expertise from the other work that you've been doing, what's your assessment of Trump's approach to the legal system?
I mean, I follow it, of course, but because I'm egocentric, so I was thinking of my research project, like, if this is gonna be published, the whole Trump situation will be changed. Like, it will change every day, so it's not worth looking at it right now. But I told you before, like, I have a rather Pollyanna approach to the constitutional crisis in the U.S. In terms, like, coming to about the judges and the legal, especially about the judges, because the judges were the first visible resistance. And after the first month of the Trump administrations, which would block all these unconstitutional laws and put temporary injunctions, and some would say it's not resistance, they were just doing their jobs because it was so openly unconstitutional, so why should we glorify them? But of course a lot of others didn't. But these judges were not only appointed by Democrats, but also by Republicans. So I feel like there was also a wake-up moment in this group. What was more depressing to me was how the law firms reacted, because after this attack on Perkins Coie, which was this law firm that was representing Hillary Clinton and other Democratic politicians, they were basically saying, well, we are lifting your security clearance, you have no access to the government, and all of your clients who will work with won't be able to work with us. And now we have so many law firms that basically cave into the president and made deals and say, well, of course, yes, we will commit some of our pro bono work to causes of the government and or for supporters of the government. And I think basically now the Trump administration said we are even deciding which kind of causes you are defending now, which means that the pool of lawyers who were like maybe dedicated to civil society causes, to immigrant rights, to abortion rights, is decreasing like by the minute, because they're just like putting all their money and resources and efforts into these stupid causes of the Trump administration. So that's okay. That was not so hopeful at the end. I'm sorry, but the judges were great.
Let me hand it over to the audience now for questions. I'm sure we've got one there, and then I'll come there, and then I'll come there. So, do we have a mic here, Jofi?
Thank you so much. I think this is such an important topic. It was very interesting to listen to you, so thank you. I have a question regarding digitalization, because this didn't show up, and somehow all the examples of resistance you presented are very much based on social interaction, people exchanging. But then I'm also noticing like also legal and justice systems are changing due to digitalization, you know, like AI taking over decision making. So I'm wondering, did you get any insights on that, or what is your personal stance on digitalization also countering resistance efforts in the realm? Thank you.
Thank you. Is this one by one? Okay.
Yeah.
No, because I didn't look at digitalization. But it's an interesting point, because I think, I mean, no, I didn't. On this particular case, I didn't look at it. I'm just very a bit critical about the digitalization in the legal field, as it's very much used and people are not so aware of it. Especially when it comes to also, I remember the Dutch case about the social benefit scheme, which is just very arbitrarily cutting social benefits through AI from whatever single mothers, and so it might be. Thank you. I would look at it, but I have no idea now.
Ambassador Hill.
Oh, good.
First of all, I think it's a great piece of research, because what you're doing is taking something that people have seen in isolation, then you're cataloging these various efforts in the judicial system. I don't know about the lawyers going to bars. I mean, I think in the United States, everyone needs a drink right now, so I don't know if that's a strategy or not. One thing, though, I think in cataloging these issues, I just have trouble seeing them without also seeing the context of mass movement in between them. Because even if you're a judge, I mean, judges say, no, we just interpret the law. That's true to a point, but they're also affected by the psychology of the moment. And when you see millions of Americans out on the streets, which you didn't see a month ago, and when you see this, 100 of the top universities banding together. And by the way, in terms of a unicorn, you can talk about how they have essentially taken some of Trump's old strategy of just suing to the point where their opponent, in this case Trump himself, can't keep up with all the lawsuits. So I think you do have to kind of look at the atmosphere. I mean, I agree with you about these money center law firms, but even those have been shamed now into getting with the program, and that's done by public opinion. And as tough as your interlocutors were on Poland, you cannot talk about resistance in Poland without talking about mass movement. In fact, those 8 years of peace. It always sounds sort of scatological to talk about piss and poo, but anyway, those 8 years of peace, every week people were out on the streets, every week. And I think the important thing is the sense we're going to prevail, we're going to win this one. Finally, on issues where you expressed all this discomfort with how Poland is proceeding, you know, the most outrageous things being done by the Trump administration are, of course, in immigration. It's outrageous, including sending a guy to El Salvador, you know, just unbelievable stuff. Then you look at the polling data, and while Trump is totally underwater on the economy, 52% are supporting him on immigration, even though these are the worst elements of what he's been doing. It speaks to the fact that you kind of have to, at some point, understand that, you know, no one's perfect, not Poles, not Americans, and you have to kind of go for winners. And I think the economy is a winner. Everyone feels that. And when he messes with the economy, everyone feels it. The immigration issue, which I feel deeply concerned about, that's not the way to win this thing, at least for now. Anyway, it's more of a comment than a question. But thank you for the research. I think it's fabulous.
Thank you. No, but I wanted to mention, because it was not only the law firms, it was, I mean, this mass movement, I mean, I don't know, everyone knows Project 2025, but does anyone know Democracy 2025? It's a group of over 450 organizations, legal organizations that were getting prepared for Trump 2, and they were waiting for filing the lawsuits. Like, this is just one big group of, like, their immigration lawyers, their labor unionists, there are a lot of people who are like doing this kind of work. The other thing about the immigration, I'm not so sure, because I feel like this Abrego Garcia case about this Maryland father of three who was like pointed out, like, he's originally from El Salvador and came at the age of 16 to the US and was now deported to El Salvador. I mean, some of you might also remember the talk between Bukele and Trump in the White House when they were talking about the homegrown criminals. And so it's not only about the immigrants, it's also about their own people. And I feel like at this point, I feel like the Americans would wake up. No, I mean, like, if their own people are gonna get deported. I mean, I'm not American.
We're awake.
You're awake. No, and that was a scary moment, because it was basically we were all witnessing a criminal conspiracy live. So, yeah.
I'm just saying, don't let the best be the enemy of the good.
Yeah. No, exactly, and that's why I think it's important to look at these pockets, even of micro resistance, and like seeing. I mean, there's one Norwegian law scholar that that I like a lot. It's Hans-Peter Graver. He's, I think, like-minded in spirit. He was looking in his research into opposition of judges during the Nazis in the Nazi state, and he was looking at not necessarily at the heroes and not necessarily at those who were opposing the regime from the beginning, but those who basically didn't oppose ideologically the regime, but had a certain professional integrity, and by that opposing it and dissenting and showing their kind of resistance. And that was very interesting at looking at this kind of group, because the usual suspects, we all know that they will resist. It's more interesting those who don't perceive themselves as the big heroes against this fight. This fight.
Julie.
Thank you so much for your research. It's just incredible to actually see these points of light and hope, right? Even however fragile they may be, right? I'd like to hear a little bit more of your reflections on the point, well, it's related to the point about the original sin and how do you undo the damage of an illiberal democracy? Because it seems to me that the issue of setting a precedent, right, to dismantle an institution, even if that institution was built illegitimately, well, it sets a precedent, right? And establishes a tactic that can be used for illiberal purposes in the future. And so I'm curious if your interlocutors talked about this at all, and I'd love to hear your own thoughts on that too. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, it shouldn't be as pessimistic as it sounded, because my hopes were so high about Poland, and then that's why I was a bit disappointed. But no, what they all said was like they could have reacted way more radical, like the current government, in trying to change this situation. They're trying to be committed to the rule of law and doing everything by the books, and that's why everything takes so long. And they have the proposals, like for example, for the Constitutional Tribunal, to make it more like the election of the new judges. For now, it's like a simple majority in the Polish parliament to elect these judges, and the proposals would be you need a 2/3 majority to do that. So you bridge also this separation of the opponents in the parliament. It's a whole. They try to depolarize the society a little bit. They all say we cannot fix the system through the law. We need to go more social. Like there are a lot of proposals that work on these depolarization models. Like, I don't know if you might know Maciej Kiesilowski. He's a law professor teaching at CEU here in Vienna, and he has a whole project which is called Social Contract Incubator, where he's basically saying, well, we need to give a different constitutional premise, because our constitutional premise is every time like the winner takes it all, and we have 1/3 of our population are peace supporters, and they have valid points, and we need to reach out to them, and we have to integrate their views. And it's more, they don't even try so much on the legal front than on the social front. And of course, yes, there are also proposals, and they are mostly by international experts like Kim Shapley and Brian Maureen. They are talking, forget about the national laws in Poland, because Poland is part of the European Union. Just skip it and go right to the European laws and apply them somehow. You know, I mean, I'm not a legal expert. I haven't studied law. It's, as I said, a bit boring. But if you apply the European standards to it, it might solve the problem, which is considered by every Polish lawyer I talk to is terrible. Like, what do you mean to forget about the Polish legal system and just go European? But at least in Poland, you have the European Union as a super institution, which in the US you don't.
This is a very important political point that you're alluding to there in terms of the European Union, because at a time where a lot of people consider it essential that the European Union act together and coherently, it's being prevented from doing so by at least one country and one or two others as well. And so it goes to the heart of what the European Union is at a moment of geopolitical crisis, and at the very heart of that is the rule of law and constitutionalism. So it's a really, really important issue. I see a hand there. I think I know who it is, but I haven't got my long distance glasses on. I think it's Christoph. So even if I've known you for 35 years, I might not recognize you.
Yeah, it's Christoph. Your eyes are perfect, Misha. Thank you. I just wanted to make another point on Poland. I mean, I think the consternation about sort of the afterplay is quite understandable, no? But in a way, it was also pretty clear that it would be a mess, no? I think most of these PiS judges were appointed by a chamber where there is a European court ruling that the chamber was set up unconstitutionally. So there is, by definition, a huge problem. What do you do with these judges who have ruled, you know? And so you get rulings by judges who have not been appointed constitutionally. So it is a huge mess. And I mean, I understand there are no big heroes for the time being, at least, on sorting out the mess. But if you, I think, want to tell a story, a more positive, optimistic story, which I think that was your hope at the beginning, right? You could focus more on the early part of the story, because I think there is really no lack of heroes. I mean, just from these individual judges who really have stood up, from the then president of the Supreme Court to all these individual judges, very, very brave, and who also managed, I think, quite skillfully to turn this into a European issue. And I think this worked much better than with Hungary, to actually have the European Court, but also the European Commission engaged. And I think we also have there, I think at the European Court of Justice, you have a few heroes there as well, who, I don't know, I think in 2016, 17, 18, I can't remember, but basically waived by a judgment which was completely unrelated to this, but a judgment on Portugal civil servants, and if Europe could sort of interfere, or if the court could interfere. They basically signaled, please basically address us, you know, we have something to say. And I think they were also pretty prepared to actually go very far on this. Yeah. It's very interesting that I mean, if you need the Commission on these infringement procedures to follow up, and you need the Commission to then ask the court to impose a fine. But what is interesting is the court is free to impose whatever fine it wants. Yeah? The Commission can make a proposal, but you had a line of argument running in these circles where you said, you know, if we actually fine Google or so billions and billions, you know, if a member state actually, actually doesn't respect the very, very basics of the European Union upholding the rule of law, we also could consider actually imposing a really big fine. I mean, this eventually then didn't happen because the Commission eventually never got back, because at the time we had the crisis at the Belarus border, and sort of the appetite in the Commission to push with this sort of all of a sudden somehow disappeared, because they felt they could not basically, fall in the back of Poland against Lukashenko, which is another debate. But I think you have a lot of actually real heroes, and actually also a lot of potential for the future, how actually judges and legal professionals can actually make a huge contribution to fight against the undermining of democracy. Thank you.
Well, I didn't perceive a question in that, but I did hear a lot of very interesting points. So thank you very much, Christoph, for that. Just before that, I saw a disembodied hand at the back of the... there's the disembodied hand again. I haven't... I think from the voice I hear Cameron.
Yes, hi. Thank you also for the wonderful talk. I would love to hear a bit more about the political imagination of the lawyers that you've spoken with, and specifically, I'm curious if they've reflect on ways they might have accidentally or could accidentally contribute to the rise of the authoritarianism that they're combating. I mean, specifically because this authoritarianism is specifically populist, right? I mean, it is directed against elites, and as you said, legal professionals are by definition elites, right? So I'm curious if they think that their actions could be exploited and contribute to growing populism, and even if they think that their past actions in some ways have contributed to the rise of populism. Like, are they themselves responsible for populism in some way? Do they think and reflect in those terms at all? I'd be curious either way.
That's a really good question, because I only talk because in this first round of interviews I only talked to lawyers and judges who were rather human, right, on this side of the spectrum, and maybe one judge who is who would fit into this description, who said like, well, I would go crazy if I would think every time of democracy and the rule of law. If I do my job, that's not how I see my job. It's like I don't think of the consequences of I mean, I do think of the consequences, but not on the bigger scale, if that makes sense. So that was disappointing, because I mean that was a very famous judge in Austria, and I was like, what do you mean you don't think of the consequences? And you might, like, of course you have to. But no, I haven't talked. I mean, the one thing that I would be more interested in here is like to talk to the lawyers of the other part of the spectrum, maybe AfD lawyers, of lawyers who are like representing Israeli settlers, and which are also consider themselves as cause lawyers, of course, and like, but I was so far a little bit hesitant to reach out to them, but I might.
Yeah, I think, I mean, from a journalistic perspective, I would think that's...
Yeah, definitely I will, yeah.
That's potentially very, very interesting. Anyway, but yes, what can I say? Asaf.
Thanks. Just to continue this point, so there's a kind of a picture that I think is deeply ingrained in liberal thought, definitely kind of latter 20th century liberal thought, if you think of John Rawls, of laws and institutions as protecting themselves. They're kind of self-sustaining mechanisms. So if we just have the right institutions and the right constitution and the right laws in place, then they will just kind of take care of themselves, which is kind of interestingly similar to what neoliberals think about the market. That's a different issue. Anyway, I think many people are coming to the realization that that's not really the way it works. Ultimately, you know, it's a tool, and the tool is only as good as the people who are using it. And so in the beginning of your talk, there was this point about how these activists, lawyers, or legal experts perceive of what they're doing. And I think there's, I mean, I've had encounters with many of them in my country, and it seems like there are two approaches. So one of them is we are just professionals with professional integrity, and we are defenders of the law, and this is what we're doing. We're not political. Then you have those who are more politically inclined, who see this as simply an instrument in the promotion of what they believe is right and good and just. I mean, I'm wondering if there's a difference there in the consequences, because it seems, I can think of instances, we can talk about it later, where the first approach, this kind of professionalist approach, might seem cleaner, but it can backfire. It can backfire in the way that Cameron suggested. Here, again, the elites, you know, colluding amongst themselves against the people, etc. Or it can also backfire, as I can give you examples of this from Israel, where, you know, the court can only do what the court can do, right? It's pretty limited. And some things may be legally kosher, but they can be democratically horrible. And if you appeal to the Supreme Court and the court is limited in what it can do, you end up sanctioning legally by the highest legal authority in the country something that maybe
That's dangerous.
very bad. So the question is if you can see a difference in these approaches of your unicorns.
That was the one I wanted to mention with this Norwegian guy. Because I think in this the professional integrity of the first group that you were mentioned, there is a chance of them to how they see their own job, like how they perceive their work as something that they need to. It is part of the professional integrity to stand up. You know, it's not something political. It's ingrained in their professional DNA. You know what I mean? But at the same, I see your point when you're saying, like, of course that's super dangerous when you're like trying to solve political problems just legally. It can like give precedences, and then you cannot change that anymore. And then we have no abortion rights in most U.S. states. So that's dangerous. But in my research, I tried to look more into the first group, but I didn't get my answers to that, because I was really looking at what kind of ideology, like law theories are out there that might support this point of like giving you don't have to see yourself as political. It's part of your job to act that way, because you are representing the system, or you're presenting this kind of system. As long as our system is liberal democracy, you're supposed to defend it and us. You know what I mean? Okay, good.
Yeah, I mean, there's also interesting, of course, each country has its own judicial system with peculiarities, and you can go around them and say what works and what doesn't work. And one of the things that you can identify is when a populace is trying to get rid of a mechanism, that mechanism is probably quite positive. So we have in the UK something called the Judicial Review, and there's whereby a lawyer or a lawyer representing a group of people can say that the law as interpreted is flawed, and it requires a judicial review. And as a consequence, what's happened in the UK is we've got a lot of NGOs now which are made up exclusively of lawyers, and they are bringing judicial reviews on a whole variety of issues. And the previous Tory government tried to get rid of the judicial review because too much of their hastily formulated and rammed through legislation was evidently unfair. And so as soon as you see a government saying, we want to get rid of this aspect of the mechanism, that's when you know that it's probably quite a good thing. Any more questions? If not, and I can't see any at the moment, then you can continue this fascinating discussion downstairs with wine, with cheese, and with doubtless many more insights. But before you go, please, another rousing round of applause for SOLMAZ.